All my life, I have believed that silence is a form of respect. I've brought up my son with the understanding that dignity is shown through actions, not just words, and that genuine love never demands anything in return. But as I faced him that night, my hands trembling uncontrollably and my knees threatening to buckle, he grasped the profound truth. He grasped the profound truth I had spent a lifetime mistakenly equating silence with submission. I had just received my diagnosis. The doctor had looked at me with those eyes full of fake compassion and told me that I had to have surgery in 2 months. $40,000 was the amount that separated me from the possibility of living more years, of breathing without pain, of continuing to walk without my body becoming a prison. $40,000 for a son who earned over $300,000 a year. It wasn't even a sacrifice. It was a signature, a transfer, a gesture. That night I knocked on his door. My daughter-in-law answered with her usual plastic smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Elena, I didn't know you were coming unannounced," she said, shifting her body slightly so as not to let me in completely. Behind her, the house shone with a luxury that smelled of excess. White carpets, crystal vases, scented candles. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. Everything was cold. My son appeared from the stairs, his phone in his hand and his shirt ironed, as if he had stepped out of a catalog. "Mom, what's wrong? Did you call the doctor?" he asked quite absent-mindedly, as if he were talking with a colleague, not with the woman who had, in fact, taught him how to walk. I was out of breath, but I tried to keep my composure. "Yes, I contacted them. They emphasized the urgency of the surgery. The cost, however, is substantial, $40,000. I understand you're busy, my love, but I really need your help with this." He remained silent for a few seconds, and then he turned to his wife. She slowly crossed her legs, her movements deliberate, as if to emphasize a sense of control and power. $40,000, she repeated, her voice soft and almost cynical. "Elena," he continued, "even if she undergoes the surgery, what benefit would there be? It's nothing more than a waste of time. It's better to let nature take its course." A sudden crushing cold washed over me. My son's eyes dropped to the table, and then just as suddenly they snapped back up. What I saw in his eyes was more devastating than the diagnosis itself. It was the profound indifference. "Mom," he pleaded, "please don't make this into a scene. You've lived a long, full life. Don't create any further problems. It's better if you leave soon. It will be easier on everyone." His words were like tiny knives cutting deeply into my soul. I can recall nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the desperate search for something solid on which to cling, of marble. I felt my knees buckle, and before I knew it, I was on my knees, before them, not to beg, but because my body could no longer bear the weight of contempt. "Please," I said, almost in a voiceless voice, "not for myself, but for your father. He wanted you to help me." My daughter-in-law laughed softly, like someone listening to a boring story. My son turned away, avoiding my eyes, and said only, "Mom, please stand up." Is it embarrassing? Embarrassing. That word stuck with me like a brand. I stood up slowly, feeling my bones protest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind him of everything I had done for him. The nights spent sewing clothes to pay for his school, the hours of bus rides to take him to practice, my savings spent buying him his first computer, the one he had used to build his career. By the way, sfafata. But I said nothing, just a tear. Silent, it fell on the polished floor like a reflection of what I had become, a shadow in a house I had helped build. Uzi. I turned without saying goodbye. Behind me, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, low and content. "Issy, there's no point in arguing. Sometimes they give up on their own, Saka." I went out. The evening wind hit me in the face like a slap. I stopped in front of the car and stood there, motionless. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had washed, cooked, worked, written checks for him and for the first time in my life. I no longer recognized them. When I returned to my little house apartment, the walls seemed narrower, but the air was more sincere. I sat down on the couch without turning on the light. Silently, I removed my shoes and left the pain to take its courses. All tears were gone now. A strange stillness filled me. It felt as though a piece of my soul had been extinguished forever. In that moment, I understood that I would no longer ask for anything. Not money, not attention, not forgiveness. Not because I didn't need them, but because I no longer wanted to give anyone the power to see me begging. That night, I made a solemn vow to myself it would be the absolute last time I would kneel before another person. I still didn't know how, but something inside me had moved. A thin thread of pride that had reawakened after years of silence. And even if the world around me seemed to ignore it, I could clearly hear the distant sound of a promise that was about to be fulfilled. That was the night I stopped being just a rejected mother. It was the night when, without telling anyone, I began to become the woman who would change everything with a single gesture. The following days dragged on, suspended in a stagnant, heavy air, as if time itself had set out to punish me, leaving me trapped within the confines of a windowless room. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't answer my sister's calls or the questions of the neighbor who asked if I was okay. I had no answers. All I had was a silence that weighed like a millstone, and that, for the first time, began to seem like a weapon. The morning after that visit, I woke up early. The light filtered through the curtains and hit the table where I had left my bag. Inside were still the tests, the prescriptions, the doctor's sheet, with the figure written in Fred, 40,000. I looked at it for a long time, then folded it in 4 and put it in a drawer. If I had to die, at least it wouldn't be begging. But it wasn't resignation, it was calm. A calm that comes when you realize you've been pushed beyond the limit and you have nothing more to lose. I began to look at everything differently. The people, the houses, the unspoken words. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law through the screen of my phone, their photos, the dinners, the trips to Bora Bora, the luxury gifts, the studied poses. It all had a bitter taste. They constructed each and every digital smile upon something I had contributed to Krigyakaru. And they treated me as if I were an error in the process and unnecessary. Parentheses to be closed. No one knew that many years before I had been the one who had guaranteed his first mortgage when still had no credit or stability. I risked my little house, putting it in jeopardy, so that he could get started. They had told me it was an investment in love. I was wrong. It had been a loan to vanity. The days passed slowly. I went shopping with only a few coins, walking slowly, so as not to raise my blood pressure. Sometimes I would stop in front of the shop windows and wonder how it was possible that a son who earned more in a month than I had seen in a year could not find space. Not even a gesture, for the woman who had raised him alone. But silence began to take shape inside me. It was no longer empty. It was planning. It was... Every night I wrote short sentences, scattered thoughts in an old notebook. Do not forget what they said. Don't react. Watch. Every word you don't say today will be a weapon. Tomorrow. I kept it under my pillow, like a secret. One evening, as I was walking down the street in the neighborhood, I saw their car pass by. It gleamed under the street, like a promise half-kept. Inside, I saw them laughing. She, with her perfect hair, he, with that expression of someone who thinks he has everything under control. Utarabaro. I halted upon the unseen sidewalk, experiencing a sensation completely unlike any I had ever known. Not anger, but a sort of chilling clarity. It was like looking at two strangers I had once loved. That night I went home and made myself some tea, sat by the window and thought that perhaps life was giving me one last chance to understand who I was without them. I had spent years calling myself the mother of, and now, for the first time, I was just Alista Elena, and that word, alone, was starting to weigh less. I kept receiving kind messages from family friends. Your son is extraordinary, always generous. Your daughter-in-law is an elegant, refined woman. I smiled without correct them. No one knew the truth. Behind that flawless facade, nobody knew a mother had wept, pleading on her knees for even a sliver of empathy. But I decided I wouldn't talk. Not yet. I would have let the world believe their lies because the truth, when it arrives late, is all the more biting. I began to frequent the neighborhood library. It was my refuge. No one knew me and no one asked questions. I sat by the window reading old economic newspapers, and between one page and the next I noted dates and numbers. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was just trying to figure out where I had gone wrong, like an accountant of my own life. Bubble. Every now and then, I would receive news from afar. My son had purchased a new property, a stylish office, a smart investment, in a luxurious and affluent neighborhood. They said he was finally fulfilling the family dream. All I thought was that he was building that dream on the remains of mine. One Sunday, I went to Mass, not out of faith. I had lost mine long ago, but out of habit. I sat in the back, and when the priest spoke about forgiveness, I felt a pang in my chest. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, she said. It's about stopping waiting for the other person to understand. Those words stayed with me for days. I realized that I would never receive an apology, and perhaps, for the first time, I didn't even want one. The silence that everyone had mistaken for a sign of weakness was surprisingly starting to function as a powerful defense. I began to use it as a shield. Not to answer, not to react, not to explain. Every time someone asked me about my son, I smiled and changed the subject. Whenever I saw a picture of them, I always made sure to note the date and location, as if I were carefully documenting a story I planned to share someday. One evening, while I was sorting through some old documents, I found a yellow envelope at the bottom of a box. I didn't remember putting it there. On it was the handwriting of my husband, who had died 27 years earlier. Trembling, I opened it. Inside were legal papers, signatures, and a stamp with the name of our old company. One look was enough to make me realize that I had never been excluded as they had wanted me to believe. That envelope was a memory, and perhaps a weapon. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The silence in the room was profound, but this time it wasn't scary. It was the silence before the storm, and for the first time after a long time I felt a new calm growing inside me, the calm of someone who no longer needs to ask questions because they know that time alone will take care of letting those who need to speak. That night, I wrote a sentence in my notebook. Silence is not empty. It is only the voice of someone who no longer needs to explain themselves. I didn't know it yet, but I was already preparing the ground. Each peaceful breath I took, every word I carefully kept to myself, every fabricated smile I chose to ignore, would, without fail, return to haunt me. And when it did, a scream would be unnecessary. One gesture, just one, would be enough to silence them all. Sometimes I look at my hands and I don't recognize them anymore. The thin fingers, marked by small scars, the palms rough from years spent squeezing things too tightly for fear of losing them. Every mark tells something that no one remembers. A seam sewn at night, a pot, lifted when the pain in my back was already screaming a hug, given even when I had no more strength. They are the same hands that built my son's life, and yet in his perfect world, they seem to no longer exist. When I think of the first years after my husband's death, I can still smell the dust and sweat on the sheets. Those were days when there was never enough time. My husband, Carlo, was a simple but ambitious man. He founded a small company specializing in electrical maintenance, and for several years we were able to maintain a decent standard of living. After his sudden death, the company fell entirely on my shoulders. I had not studied economics, I knew nothing about accounting, but I had a determination that even I did not know. I still remember the first time I went to the bank with the ledgers under my arm, trembling in front of the manager who looked at me as if he had already been defeated. I signed with a hand that would not stop sweating, and yet I did not stop. With each contract, each customer, and every late paid bill, I felt a quiet victory, a win for me. My son was only 10 years old then. He did not understand. He could not. I watched him play with his friends in front of the bank home, and I told myself that all that pain, all that effort, had a meaning. I was doing it for him. The years passed like pages quickly turned. The company grew, slowly but steadily. I wasn't looking for wealth, just stability. But when he decided to give him a part of the company. So you'll learn to build something of your own, I told him. And he hugged me, promising that he would never leave me alone. That promise, made in front of the notary, with his still uncertain voice, seemed to me the greatest gift. I I had no idea that one day that same signature would become the boundary of my execution. Over time, he took control of the company, modernized it, and made it grow. I was proud, yes, but also tired. I remember that one day after a long meeting, I said, "Now you can do without me." He laughed and replied, "Never, never, Mom. You are the foundation of everything." Powell Bell words that I had engraved on my heart, but words I have learned fade faster than ink. When he got married, the dynamics changed. My daughter-in-law brought with her a new language made of appearances, measure, and distance. Meetings became huddles. Decisions became strategic. I, who had kept the company afloat by sewing forms together with string because we didn't have money for folders, was no longer the founder. I was the elderly lady who started everything. No one said it openly, but I felt it in every gesture, in every suppressed smile. They made me sit at the table during business lunches, but no one asked me for my opinion. I still remember an episode that marked the point of no return. During a recent company event, a young employee approached my son and, with a genuine smile, commented, "It's such a blessing to have a father with your vision who created all this." He laughed with satisfaction. I was just a few steps away. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look at me. It was as though my history had been erased with a single swipe of a sponge, and my presence was just a relic of something that was no longer needed. From that day on, I stopped going to the office. I even stopped asking for news. I stayed home and cooked for 2 people who ate in restaurants where I wouldn't be welcome. My kitchen smelled of the past, while their world smelled of plastic and success. Nevertheless, every time they got a flight or bought something new, I still saw them as those media kids just trying to look like adults. I couldn't hate them. Not yet. Then the illness came, and all that I had painstakingly built, all my unwavering dedication, crumbled to dust before those cold and cruel words. "It's your problem, not ours." At that moment, I understood that not only had they erased my name from the company's history, but also from the history of their conscience. I sat down at the table and looked at my hands. Hands that had signed contracts, lit stoves, written letters, held together a house, and I thought that perhaps I hadn't made a mistake in building so much, but I had made a mistake in not expecting to be remembered. I had confused love with devotion, generosity with sacrifice. I began to pull out old documents, photos, contracts. Some were still signed in the handwriting of Carlo Alonarasi, a founding partner. Those words hurt me, and they cured me at the same time. I realized that, no matter how much they had tried to erase me, the truth was still there, black and white, with a stamp that no one could rewrite. I took those sheets and put them in a red folder. I touched them like you touch a half-closed wound. I didn't know yet what they would be used for, but I knew I had to guard them carefully. Those weren't simply pieces of legal evidence. They served as irrefutable proof of my existence, validating the real accomplishments I had achieved, ensuring that no one could ever take away my past. That night, as the rain beat against the windows, I thought about how fragile people's memories were. My son talked about success, growth, investments. But behind those words, there was no love, only the echo of a void. I, on the other hand, had built everything with my hands, not with promises. And perhaps that's why my no longer appeared on recent documents, because my type of work wasn't brilliant. My work was invisible. I fell asleep late, with the folder next to my bed. I had stopped waiting for excuses. Now I was just waiting for the moment. Right. Because those who forget their roots sooner or later stumble over the branches they cut off, and I was ready to let them stumble on their own dara, kana. The following weeks were like a slow shipwreck. Every day I discovered a new way to feel useless. My body sent me clear signals, pain in my legs, dizziness, that tiredness that doesn't go away even with sleep. But it wasn't just the illness that was eating me up, it was the humiliation, the kind that seeps under your skin like dust and never goes away. I tried to fight back. I went to the hospital with my documents. I spoke to the administration. I even asked for a personal loan. But banks don't lend money to the elderly, and hospitals don't operate on people who can't pay. Every door I knocked on closed, with the same coldness. Bah, bah. I'm sorry, ma'am. Without coverage, we can do anything. Every time I heard that phrase, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. One afternoon, I came home with my shopping bags. Inside there was only bread, milk, and a small bag of apples. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall in front of me. It was white, bare. For years, I had kept a family photo there. There we are, my husband, my little boy, and me wearing my apron all covered in flour. I had taken it down a few days earlier. I couldn't stand seeing the smile of that little boy who believed the world was good. I decided to try one last time. I picked up the phone and called my son. He answered after several rings, sounding tired, as if he already knew what I wanted. Mom, I told you that we would discuss this later on, he added. I tried to control my voice. There's no later, Marco. The doctor said I have to have the surgery within a month. If I wait any longer, I won't survive. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard a sigh and her voice. My daughter-in-law's in the background. Is this your mother again? She asked. Tell him straight, Marco. And he did. Mom, I can't. We have other commitments, you understand. Mortgage, investments, expenses. I can just come up with $40,000 out of the blue. White. I closed my eyes. Commitments, I repeated softly. And what am I, Marco? A debt that has expired. Don't start the melodrama again, he said. Please, try to be rational. You're a grown-up. You know that life has a cycle. You can't expect everyone to stop for you. Those words were like a blade cutting my voice. I didn't answer. I just breathed slowly so as not to give in to the temptation to scream. Then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, clear, as if she were next to me. If this continues, Marco, I swear I can't stand it. Your mother must understand that she can't always count on you. She's selfish. We have one life. A sharp blow inside me made me realize it was over. Okay, I said. Don't worry, I won't bother you anymore. Mom, don't take it badly. I won't take it badly, I interrupted him. Just remember, these words, Marco. One day you'll understand them. And I ended the call. The sound of the click stuck in my head. That little electronic noise that marked the end of everything. But I didn't cry. I didn't have the strength anymore. I rose, I opened the window, and then I allowed the cool evening air to enter. It was as if every breath took away a fragment of weakness. 2 days passed, I didn't leave the house anymore. I watched the clouds pass by and wondered how much time I had left. Then one morning, there was a knock on the door. It was the postman. He handed me a letter from the clinic. Dear Mrs. Rossi, we inform you that in the absence of payment, your appointment for the surgery has been cancelled. No signature, no explanation. Only the date, and that terrible word, crossed out. I sat down on the floor, the letter between my fingers, and for the first time, instead of crying, I started to laugh. An empty, almost frightening laugh that bounced off the walls. It was as if reality had finally stopped pretending. There was nothing more to wait for, and in that nothingness I found a strange freedom. I decided to head out, grabbed my old gray coat, and then took the bus. I didn't know where I was going, perhaps only far away. I passed my son's house. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the light from the chandelier above the table eel. Below, I recognized her voice, hers, and 2 other friends, perhaps laughter, glasses of wine, music in the background. I approached the door, driven by an impulse I didn't understand. I rang the bell. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps and her voice. Who is it? Just your mother-in-law, I said softly. I think I forgot a document. The door opened a few inches. She appeared in a silk dressing gown, with a glass in her hand. Elena, now is not the time. We have guests. I know it is not the time, I answered. But I don't have time anymore. She looked at me for a moment, then turned inside. Marco, it's your mother. He arrived with a tense expression. Mom, what are you doing here? I told you to call earlier. I just wanted a little bit of your time, I said. Nothing else. Not now, he cut me off. Just 5 minutes, Marco. I promise you won't see me again. He sighed irritably. Enough, Mom. You have to understand that you can't just show up like that whenever you want. It's intrusive. And then I told you, we can't help you. Don't insist. And before I could reply, he closed the door. That sound was different from all the others. It wasn't just a door closing. It was a seal, a wall. I stood there, on the landing for a few seconds. I could hear the laughter coming back from inside, the music starting up again, life continuing as if I had never existed. Then I slowly went down the stairs. Every step was a wound, but also a lesson. It was that evening, returning home with the wind cutting my face, that I promised myself that I would never knock on that door again. They had chosen to lock me out, but they didn't know that, in doing so, they had also locked something inside me, a strength that I had never known. Sitting on the bed, I took the red folder that I had found some time before, opened it, and looked at it for a long time. There were signatures, stamps, numbers, all there, silent and powerful. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I felt that this was my anchor. I closed the folder and placed it next to me, then turned off the light. It was in that darkness that she truly understood what it meant to be alone. But it was a different solitude. No longer the absence of someone, but the presence of herself. It was the beginning of something that not even they could stop. She didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the noise of the distant city and the slow beating of my heart. Every sound seemed to repeat the same sentence. You haven't lost everything. You've just stopped waiting, and that's when I decided I wouldn't ask for anything anymore. I would just act silently, as always. But this time, my silence would make noise. There are things that you keep hidden, not out of fear, but out of instinct, as if a part of you knew that one day they would come in handy again. That document, sealed in the yellowed envelope that I had found a few weeks earlier, was one of those things. I had kept it for 27 years without ever opening it. And now, sitting at the table with the red folder in front of me, I realized that perhaps that silent gesture from back then had been my husband's last act of protection for me. He opened the envelope slowly, his fingers trembling. The faint smell of old paper, so familiar, transported me back in time to that small office room where he used to sign the contracts with his trusty blue pen, the one he always kept in his pocket. Inside were notarial documents, registers, and a sheet of paper with a signature that I recognized immediately. Carlo Rossi. It didn't take more than a quick perusal to reveal that, despite these subsequent alterations and transfers, I'd executed a portion of the primary property, specifically the one where my son's new office is currently located, remained in my name. I stopped, staring at that page like you might stare at a wound that no longer hurts, but that you remember perfectly how it started. My son had constructed everything on that land under the assumption that it was solely his property. He had asked for financing, he had registered contracts, he had used my name as a legal guarantee, but he had never thought to check the source. I was still standing there, a lingering shadow he had somehow forgotten to erase. I closed the envelope and placed it on the table. The room was quiet, yet within me a low hum persisted, as if every thought I possessed were speaking its own unique voice simultaneously. I felt neither joy nor anger. I felt something more complex, the feeling of holding the truth in my hands after a lifetime of lies. I picked up the phone and looked up the number of an old friend of Carlo's, a legal consultant I hadn't seen in years. "Mrs. Rossi," he said in a surprised voice when he recognized me. "I didn't imagine you would call me. I need some advice," I replied. "But this must remain between us." The next day, he received me in his small office, the same one where my husband had signed the first deeds of the company. The furniture had not changed. The same wooden desk, the same beige curtains, even the same lamp that flickered slightly. I showed him the documents, and he examined them carefully, page after page, until he stopped at one point. "Do you have any idea what this means, Elena?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "It means I haven't disappeared yet." He gave me a long look as if trying to read between the lines of my calm. He might ask for a review. Technically, the building and the activities that take place on that land are jointly owned. If he decides to move legally, his son will be in serious trouble. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. There was a light, a thin rain, like the one on days when the world seems suspended. "I don't want to destroy it," he said. "Finally, I just want him to understand." He nodded. Sometimes, making someone understand is worse than destroying them. I walked home with the folder clutched to my chest. Each step was lighter than the last, not because I had found a solution, but because for the first time, I had something they didn't. No tal until I didn't. Awareness. I knew I wasn't helpless. I held in my hand a piece of their confidence, their arrogance, their glass world. And that piece bore my name. I didn't sleep that night. I went to the window, sat down, and held a cup of tea while I looked through the folder on the table. I watched the rain fall and wondered how many times over the years I had chosen to remain silent when I could have reacted. Perhaps too many, but silence was no longer weakness. It was preparation. A few days passed. My son no longer called me, and I didn't look for him. I didn't want words. I wanted facts. One morning, I received a promotional letter addressed to him, but it had arrived at my old address. The envelope was from his new accountant and contained a financial statement. I didn't even have to open it to understand his name, his company, the ownership itself, which was still partly fine, all connected, and that I understood that the moment was coming not for revenge, but for fairness. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to see, to understand what it means to take away the voice of the person who gave you life. I took a notebook and began to write. Not a letter, but a sort of diary. Every page contained a truth. It was on the day I signed that mortgage, on the day I cooked with a fever so he could study, on the day he said I was no longer useful. These are all days I'll never forget. These I'll never forget. Not to remind them of the past, but to remind myself that I existed even without their approval. With every written word, I heard my voice come back. It was like digging under years of soil and still finding a living seed. And in that seed was everything. The woman who had built a company, the mother who had loved too much, the widow who had withstood the pain, and the human being who, after so long, was preparing to stop suffering. Shortly afterwards, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the bank manager. "Mrs. Rossi, we have records indicating that you are still the registered owner of 51% of the property on Via Manzoni. Is that correct?" I smiled softly. "Yes, that is correct. We are about to register an extension of credit linked to that property. You want to confirm your authorization?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "I understand. Then we will stop the procedure." When I ended the call, I felt something change in the air. At some point, somewhere, my son would receive a notification regarding a denied transaction, a surprise entirely unforeseen. I had not shouted. I had not threatened. I had not said a word. I had simply said no to anyone. And that no, spoken calmly, carried more weight than all the pleas in the world. That same evening, I received a message from him. "Mom, the bank says there are problems with the property. Can you explain?" I didn't answer. Then another. "Can you at least call me back?" Silence. Hours passed. The phone continued to flash throughout the night, messages, missed calls. I continued to watch the light on the screen flickering on and off, just like the labored breathing of someone receiving artificial respiration. I felt no satisfaction, only peace. It was as if life was finally restoring balance. I took the document and put it in a new illegal folder with a label that I wrote by hand. Reminder, I exist. Then I put it in a drawer with my house keys and a small silver cross that I had worn when I was young. I didn't know yet to what extent my choice would shake their world, but I was ready, because those who have lived years in silence learn that the greatest revolutions don't make any noise. They move slowly, precisely, and arrive when no one expects them. And I was just waiting for the moment when my silence would begin to speak for itself. When the invitation to dinner arrived, I read it 3 times before believing it. It was a short, almost impersonal message. "Mom, we're celebrating a new contract with some partners on Saturday night. We'd love for you to come. Marco." There were no hearts, no affectionate words, no hidden apologies. Just a cold invitation, like a note from the office. But I accepted it, not because I wanted to see them again, but because I knew that this would be my scene, my moment. I had spent weeks in silence, waiting. I had blocked the banking transaction and let anxiety start working for me. I hadn't replied to my son's messages, and I hadn't even mentioned what I knew. I wanted them to believe that they were still in control, that they could manipulate appearances as always. And when that dinner came, I understood that their world was about to fall apart. But no one noticed yet. That Saturday night, I put on my simplest dress, a black dress that I had had for years, with a string of pearls that had belonged to my mother. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time, in a long time, I saw myself for who I had become. A woman who had stopped asking questions and had learned to decide. I didn't need to wear makeup or look younger. I just had to be present and my silence would do the rest. I arrived at Marco's house just before 8 o'clock. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The lights were on. The garden was lit up. Laughter filtered through the porch, one of those houses you see in magazines, tidy and empty at the same time. When the door opened, my daughter-in-law greeted me with a tight smile. "Elena, what a surprise. I thought you wouldn't come." "I would have missed such an important evening," I replied. My voice was calm, almost polite, and he invited me in. The dining room was elegantly set. Crystal glasses, white plates, neatly folded napkins. Around the table were guests I didn't know. Men in suits, women with discreet jewelry and measured smiles. My son approached and absent-mindedly kissed me on the cheek. "Mom, come in. Let me introduce you to some of my colleagues." I nodded. I sat down at the end of the table, next to a lady who smelled of vanilla and talked too much. The dinner began with toasts and small talk. Marco talked about his projects, new investments, and signed contracts. Everyone listened to him as if they were in front of a leader. I observed every gesture, every laugh, every glance of complicity with my daughter-in-law. It was a well-acted show, but I knew the truth. That confidence was fragile. A breath of air was enough to make it collapse. Halfway through the evening, one of the guests, a tall man with glasses and a business-like tone, mentioned something that turned the tide. "Marco, congratulations on the new headquarters. It's a fantastic structure. That land, if I'm not mistaken, is owned by your company." Marco smiled. "Are you sure?" "Yes, it's all ours. We invested a lot in it, but it was worth it." I slowly looked up from my plate. I felt my heart beat slower, as if I knew it was time. "Not all yours," I said calmly. My voice trailed off. The air was like a sharp knife. There was a brief silence, one of those that make more noise than 1,000 words. Marco's eyes widened. My daughter-in-law stopped smiling. The guests looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or pretend not to have heard. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked, trying to maintain control. I placed the napkin on the table. "I mean that the property on which you have built this whole dream," I said slowly. "It's not all yours. A part of it still belongs to me, and without my signature, no contract can be legally valid." No one moved. Only the ticking of the clock marked the seconds. Marco tried to smile, but his face had gone pale. "Mom, I think you're getting confused," he said, with a forced laugh. I just looked at him. "Do you think I'm getting confused?" I pulled a neatly folded copy of the document from my bag. I placed it on the table next to his glass of wine. There was proof. One of the guests, the main partner, I recognized him by the way the others were looking at him, leaned forward, quickly read the first page, then looked up at Marco. "Is it true?" he asked in a low but sharp voice. My son opened his mouth, but no words came out. My daughter-in-law tried to intervene. "Elena, this is not the time to talk about these things. We are among friends. The truth always has its moment." I interrupted her, and that was perfect. I heard the other guests' breathing change. Some turned to Marco, others looked at the document with embarrassed curiosity. I remained still, composed. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to humiliate them. Only facts needed speaking out loud. Marco stood up abruptly, grabbing the paper. "Where did you get this? Who gave you this?" "A man you never thanked enough." "Your father," I replied. "He was the one who believed that the roots of a family should remain strong. Instead, did you just focus on the branches?" My daughter-in-law tried to smile, but her voice was shaking. "Elena, we don't want to argue in front of the guests. Please, let's sit down. I'll explain everything later." I turned to her. "There's nothing to explain. I just reminded everyone that the land on which you built your happiness has a name engraved in stone, and it's not yours." There was a very long silence. No one touched the food anymore. The guests avoided looking at me directly. Marco, standing, was breathing heavily, as if he were trying to contain something. Then he slowly placed the document on the table and said in a low voice, "Perhaps we should talk in private." "No need," I replied. "I've already said everything. But remember, Marco, I didn't do anything. I just stopped letting you do it." I stood up. No one tried to stop me. I picked up my bag, adjusted my scarf around my shoulders, and headed for the door. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. "Good evening," I said, "and enjoy your meal." Outside, the air was cold but clean. I looked at the illuminated house behind me. Inside, the music had stopped. Slowly, shadows alone shifted, like those unsure which way to look, unable to find direction in the dim. I walked down the driveway with a steady step. With every step came liberation, and with every meter a fading memory. I had not destroyed anything. I had only given the truth back its place. And that dinner, their great celebration, would become the point at which everything would begin to fall apart. When I returned home, I sat by the window and watched the reflection of the distant lights. I felt no revenge or remorse, only peace. I had stopped asking to be seen. Now everyone saw me, even if they didn't want to. That was the night I slept without dreams for the first time, and for the first time, I no longer needed forgiveness. When I came back home that night, I didn't even bother to switch on the lights. I dropped my bag onto the chair, removed my shoes, and just stood there, in the stillness. It was a silence quite different from any of the silences I had ever known up to that point. It didn't weigh, it didn't oppress. It was full, alive, as if the air itself was breathing with me. I sat down on the couch and closed my eyes. I could still hear the echoes of the voices from that dinner. The whispers, the embarrassed glances, Marco's broken voice as he tried to find words to defend himself. But there was no more pain, only a peace that is born when you finally stop asking to be understood. Throughout my entire life, I had believed that strength lay in the ability to endure the hurtful words, the humiliating experiences, and the deafening experiences, and the deafening silence. That night I realized I had been wrong. True strength is knowing when enough is enough. And I had said enough. With a single sentence, with a document on the table, I had restored balance to something that had been crooked for years. Nothing else was needed. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. Every sip tasted of calm. I saw my image in the window glass, silver hair, wrinkles I no longer concealed, and eyes that felt fatigued yet remained full of life. I was no longer the pleading mother who had knelt down, nor the woman who counted the nights without sleep. I was the type of person who had learned to stand tall in the silence. I picked up the red folder and placed it on the table, next to the extinguished lamp. I brushed my fingers over it, as if I could thank it. That piece of paper had changed everything, but not because it gave me power. No, it was because it had given me back the truth. My truth. The one that they had tried to bury under years of indifference and shame. I got into bed without taking off my clothes. The clock on the nightstand read 2 o'clock in the morning. I closed my eyes and realized that, for the first time in a long time, I no longer needed to pray to fall asleep. I didn't need words or promises. That new silence was enough for me, which was no longer solitude but freedom. I woke up late the next morning. The light came in through the thin curtains and illuminated the room, as if to remind me that there was still a tomorrow. I ate breakfast slowly without thinking about anything. Then, while I was drinking my coffee, the phone rang. I didn't look at the number. I just let it ring. Then 3 more. 4 more times. On the 5th call, I answered. Mom? Marco's voice was hoarse, cracked. Can we talk? There was a long pause. I took a breath, then said, There's nothing to say. Mom, please, last night, you overdid it. You embarrassed me in front of the partners. You couldn't have done that. Oh, so the problem is embarrassment. I interrupted him. Not the truth. Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you, but you can't behave like this. There are investors, important people, and I'm not. I asked. I wasn't. When I was washing the office floors at 6 in the morning so you could sleep peacefully, when I was carrying the ledgers on the bus in the rain, when I was signing contracts with my hands shaking on the other side. Silence, then just a sigh. You're not okay, Mom. I don't know why you're doing this, but stop ruining yourself. Ruining me. That word made me smile. Don't worry, I said softly. From now on, I won't ruin anything. Not for you or anyone else. I disconnected the call, observing the phone screen remained lit, the notifications rapidly blinking like some kind of persistent torment. Then I turned it off. From that moment on, I decided I wouldn't answer anymore, that I wouldn't let anyone drag me back into their world of lies. Hours passed, then days, no contact. Every evening I would go back to sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the distant lights of the city. I seemed to see myself again reflected in that darkness, no longer as a victim, but as an observer. I was learning to look at my life from the outside calmly, as if I had finally found the right distance to understand. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. He was my neighbor, Mrs. Conti, a very kind woman, someone I hadn't had much contact with before. She brought me a local newspaper. Look here, she said, smiling. They're talking about your family. Congratulations. I read the headline. Entrepreneur Marco Rossi announces new expansion plans, but sources reveal legal tensions over ownership of the headquarters. I sighed. There was no point in reading any further. I had seen it all coming. Your son is a good boy, she said. But rich families always have problems with money, she nodded with a vague smile. Yeah, but it's not always about money. As soon as she left, I was left alone with the newspaper in my hand. I folded it and put it in the red folder, like another piece of my story. Then I wrote a sentence on a blank sheet of paper. Those who don't recognize you when you're alive will end up remembering you when they have nothing left. It was a promise, not of revenge, but of balance. That night I fell asleep again without crying. It was a new habit and I liked it. Every morning I woke up with a feeling of lightness, as if I had given back to the world something that no longer belonged to me. Guilt. I had stopped looking for explanations. I had stopped defending myself. I received other, more desperate messages. Mom, please call me back, then a longer one. They've suspended the contract. We need your signature to unblock the situation. Please help me. I promise we'll fix everything. I read it. Then I deleted it. Not because I was cruel, but because it was too late. Some doors, once closed, become walls. In the following days, I began to walk every morning. The cold air cleared my skin. In my mind, I looked at the people on the street and realized how full the world was. Even without them, it was as if I were rediscovering life in a language I had forgotten. The sound of the leaves, the sound of footsteps, the smell of bread, little things that don't ask for anything but make you feel alive. One evening, I stopped in front of the sea. I hadn't seen it for years. The waves were breaking slowly against the rocks, and the sky was a dark blue that seemed infinite. I sat on a bench and thought about Carlo. If he had been there, perhaps he would have told me not to stop believing in goodness. But by now, I knew that goodness alone is not enough. You just needed to lock it away when others are attempting to use it against you. I returned home late, but with a smile that I didn't remember ever having. That night, I slept soundly, without dreams, without ghosts. I slept like someone who has finally repaid every debt, even the emotional ones. And when I woke up, I realized that the pain had not gone away. It had only changed shape. It was no longer an open wound. It was a scar I could touch without fear. They didn't know it, but I had already decided everything. Not during that night, not even on the day of the dinner, but significantly earlier, at the precise moment my son had told me that my existence was a burden on others. In that moment, a part of me died, but another part had already begun silently to write the script for my exit from the scene. Not a goodbye, but a handover from the woman who had endured everything to the one who would finally take action. I had spent years building, saving, protecting. Now it was time to give it all back, but in my own way. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for balance. That word kept repeating in my head, a subtle melody almost impossible to ignore, a word signifying balance. The world had taken too much from me, and I had let it happen, thinking it was love. But love, without respect, becomes only a gentle form of annulment. One afternoon, I went to the notary. He was an elderly man, with light eyes and the tired tone of someone who has seen too many inheritances destroy families. "Mrs. Rossi," he said, after reading the documents I had brought you to, "you still own 50% of the property on Via Manzoni. You can do whatever you want. With your share, do you want to sell it?" I smiled. "No, I want to donate it." He looked up, curiously. "To whom, if I may ask?" "To whom do you owe me nothing?" I replied. He nodded as if he had understood immediately. He pulled out the forms and began to write. Each signature I added was a gentle closure, an invisible suture on wounds that had been open for years. I decided to transfer my share of the property to a foundation that cared for elderly women without families. I had read about them some time before. They offered housing, legal assistance, and training, courses to those who had been forgotten. I donated everything, without leaving any room for second thoughts. The notary looked at me in silence as I signed the last sheet. "Do you know that with this decision you are giving up all rights?" "It's for precisely that reason that I do it." Upon exiting the office, I felt the cool November air gently touch my face, a cold but genuine caress. I went for a walk to the nearby park and sat on a bench. I watched the leaves fall, one after the other, light and free. I thought that I, too, was doing the same thing, letting go of everything I could no longer carry. No one knew about that decision, not Margot, not my daughter-in-law, not their lawyers. And I had no intention of telling them right away. I had learned that silence, when it comes at the right time, is worth more than any explanation. 2 weeks passed with no contact at all, and then, one Monday morning, I received a phone call. It was the director of the foundation. "Mrs. Rossi, we have received your donation," she said in an excited voice. "You don't know how much good this choice will do. Can we publicly name you as a benefactor?" "No," I replied. "I would prefer to remain invisible. People like me have already given too much face to pain." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then a simple sentence that made me smile. "I wish you peace, Mrs. Rossi. I think she deserves it." I ended the call and realized that, for the first time in a long time, I felt lighthearted. Not because I had won, but because I had come full circle. Everything they had used against me, my kindness, my trust, my patience, had become my strength. I had done something that absolutely no one expected from a woman like me. I had acted with silent precision. That same evening, my phone began to ring. "Marco," I didn't answer. Then a message came in. "Mom, the bank says the property has been transferred." "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Another one came in. "You cannot do this. Legally, we need your signature to keep the contracts. Please, call me." Again, silence. I imagined the scene. Inside his office, with his tie loosened and loosened, his voice gained volume as he interacted with his business associates. His wife looking at him with those empty eyes, full only of fear for the loss of prestige. Their elaborate edifice of security, erected upon unstable foundations, now began to crack and crumble. The ironic twist being that I hadn't had to resort to any cruel actions. I had simply told the truth at the right time, and let the consequences speak for themselves. I didn't sleep a wink that night, but not because I was anxious. I spent the night awake, looking at the city lights, wondering if my husband could see me from somewhere. "I did it, Carlo," I whispered. "I didn't shout. I didn't destroy. I simply returned what was no longer mine." The next day, I received an official email from their lawyer. The tone was cold, bureaucratic. "Dear Mrs. Rossi, in light of the recent property transfer, we hope to clarify your intentions and discuss the possibility of reaching a mutually beneficial agreement." I deleted the message without reading the rest. I didn't have to clarify anything. Everything was already clear. Over the next few days, the calls began from unknown numbers. I never answered. I enjoyed imagining each ringing as a reminder of my newfound authority, the right to embrace silence, though a silence that currently felt like a condemnation. One afternoon, as I was walking along the riverbank, I stopped to look at the reflection of the sun on the water. I had a small white envelope with me. Inside was a copy of the donation and a handwritten letter. I dropped it into the water. The current slowly carried it away. In that letter, I had written only one sentence: "Not everything you lose is a defeat." I returned home and found a note in the mailbox with no return address. "You can't do this to us. Please think of us at least. I recognized my daughter-in-law's handwriting, folded it, and placed it next to the original document in the red folder, then closed it and put it in the top drawer. It was my archive of truth. That evening, I cooked for myself a simple vegetable soup and a piece of toast. I ate slowly, in silence. Every spoonful tasted of freedom. I had lost everything I had thought was important, but I had gained something that no one would ever take away from me again: my voice. Before going to bed, I wrote a sentence in my notebook. You don't have to shout to make yourself heard. You just have to know when to stop talking. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling for a few minutes. I could hear the rain falling, softly, and it felt like a blessing. I had done what I had to do, not to punish but to free myself. And as the sound of the rain became a distant song, I understood that my silence had become more powerful than any word. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to change forever, and by the time they found out the rest, it would be too late to ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness. The morning I read the news, I wasn't a bit surprised. It was as if I had always known it would come, like a storm that announces it itself from afar with the scent of the changing air. I woke up early, as I had been doing for some time. The habit of getting up at dawn had never gone away, not even when life seemed to have stopped. I put the coffee pot on and sat down at the table with the empty cup in front of me. The newspaper was there, tucked under the door, like every morning. I took it slowly, opened it, and the headline greeted me with an almost ironic coldness. Corporate crisis. Rossi Company suspends activities after real estate funds freeze. I read the entire article slowly, word for word. The discussion focused on management mistakes, legal issues concerning land ownership, and investors requesting immediate clarification and opinion. No one mentioned names, but I knew them. Every line told the story of a castle built on pride that collapsed because of an ignored truth. The truth I'd let fall onto the table hard and heavy like a stone. That evening, at their dinner, I took a sip of bitter, thick coffee. Outside, the city was waking up slowly, oblivious to everything. People were running to work, children were laughing on their way to school, and I, in that small apartment that smelled of paper and rain, smiled for the first time weightlessly, not with happiness, but with liberation. My notebook was resting next to the newspaper. I opened it and wrote, "Lies can grow like trees, but the truth is the root, and when the earth shakes, it is the root that decides who remains standing." I closed my notebook and let myself relax against the back of my chair. I thought back to the entire journey that had led me to that moment. The humiliations, the silence, the tears, the discovery of that document, the dinner. It had all served not to destroy them, but to free me from their world without any more chains. Around noon, the phone began to vibrate. I didn't look at the screen right away. I knew who it was. When I finally picked up the phone, I saw his name, Marco. There was no more anger inside me, only distance. I let it ring until the end. Then a message came. Mom, please. I swear I didn't know anything. They froze our accounts. They're talking about bankruptcy. They've frozen all the projects. I beg you, tell me we can solve this. I ran a hand through my hair. Those words reminded me of my own from years ago, when I begged for help. Now the roles were reversed, but I felt no satisfaction. Only the certainty that everything had followed its natural course. He had called his mother's life a burden, and now he was discovering what it meant to carry the weight of his own choices on his shoulders. I didn't answer. I simply filed the message away, then left the house. The sky was overcast, but the air smelled of the sea. I took the tram and stopped in front of the window of a small bar. I went in, ordered a cappuccino and a croissant, and sat down by the window. The television on the walls was broadcasting the local news. An uninflected voice delivered the news. The successful entrepreneur Marco Rossi, recognized for his swift ascent in the infrastructure industry, is currently facing the suspension of his business operations. This action follows a thorough legal examination into the company's ownership of the land it utilizes. Authorities confirmed that a portion of the company's shares was gifted to a charitable organization without prior notification to the business partners. I smiled slightly. A young woman at the next table watched the news and commented with a friend. Incredible. A story from a movie. I wonder who was behind that donation. I sipped my cappuccino in silence. No one knew that the woman behind that story was sitting a few meters away from them, wearing a gray coat and calm eyes. After arriving home, I found that there was another letter inside the mailbox. It was handwritten. The handwriting was shaky. Mom, we haven't slept in days. Everything I've built is crumbling. Please, help me understand why. What do you want from us? I sat down at the table and read those words 3 times. Then I took a pen and wrote a reply on a blank sheet of paper. Just 1 sentence. I just wanted you to learn the value of what you destroyed. I didn't send it. I folded it and put it in my notebook, between the pages of that chapter that talked about forgiveness and detachment. I knew that my words wouldn't change anything. Some lessons aren't taught by talking, but by letting silence teach itself. In the following days, the press began to dig. They talked about lost funds, lack of transparency, and rash choices. My son's reputation was crumbling like sand, and the more I read, the less I felt the need to intervene. It was no longer my battle. It was simply fate restoring a measure of balance to the world. One morning, the director of the foundation called me, Mrs. Rossi. You can't imagine how many lives your donation will change. We've already started work on a new shelter. We'd like to name it after you, but I understand if you prefer to remain anonymous. Remain anonymous, I said. But if you really want to give it a name, call it the House of the Root. She laughed softly. Why root? Because it's the part that no one sees, but without it, nothing survives. When I hung up, I felt a subtle warmth spread through my chest. It was the first time in years that the word giving didn't hurt. I had given everything, but for the first time, I hadn't lost anything. That evening, while I was having dinner alone, I watched the candle flame flicker on the table. I thought of Marco, his wife, and their sleepless nights, not with hatred, but with a quiet sadness. Like looking at an old ruined painting you once loved. I wrote one last sentence in my journal before going to bed. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. I turned off the light, and as darkness filled the room, I heard the distant sound of the wind. It was no longer the wind of anger. It was the wind of change. The next day, at the bar, I found a new newspaper with an even bigger headline on the cover. Anonymous donation reveals family scandal. Rossi's heir accuses his mother of betraying him. I read the article. They talked about deteriorating relationships, personal choices that had public consequences, but the sentence that struck me the most was a quote from Marco, quoted in quotation marks. We didn't know our mother still had so much power. I put the newspaper down, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. Power, I thought, doesn't lie in money or documents. It lies in knowing how to say no when everyone else thinks you're done for. I got up, left a coin on the table, and left. The air was cold, but the sun was beginning to filter through the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, I walked without thinking about the past. I had already written my ending, only they hadn't figured it out yet. A few weeks passed, and by now, silence had become my home, not a desolate void, but a place where a new unburdened calm resided, allowing me to breathe freely, unhindered by fear. I had learned to live without expectations, without regrets. Everything that was supposed to happen had already happened, and I had stopped looking for excuses. Fate, however, always ensures that stories, as we all know, culminate in a final unforgettable encounter. It was one of those Saturday afternoons when the sky is gray and the wind smells of rain. I was returning from the market with a bag of bread and fruit when I saw him. He was standing in front of the door of my building. Marco, my only son, had a gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, and a creased jacket. He looked older than his 40 years. I didn't expect to see him, but I wasn't surprised. When things fall apart in life, people often look back to the places they previously escaped from. I stood a few steps behind, watching him. For one brief instant, I saw the child he once was, the one who used to run through the yard with his knees scraped, laughing, when his father would lift him into his arms, but that image quickly dissolved. Before me was no longer a son. There was a man who had used a mother's love as a guarantee for his dreams and now sought redemption not out of remorse but out of necessity. When he noticed me, he took a step forward. "Mom," he said. His voice was shaking. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. He opened the door, went up the stairs without looking back, but he followed me. "Please, just 5 minutes. I don't want to argue." We arrived in front of my door. I stopped, put the bag on the floor, and looked at him. 5 minutes, I said. Not one more. He entered slowly, like a stranger who no longer knows where to put his feet. He looked around. The room was simple, clean, tidy. Not a single family photograph nor any other memento was visible. The only items present were an open window and a plant on the windowsill. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Everyone turns their backs on me. The investors, the partners, even Laura, left to stay with her mother." "I'm sorry," I replied softly. "Aren't you curious to know how it happened? To know everything I've lost?" "No," I said, "because I already know. You lost the same things I lost all those years ago. Only you took them from me." He swallowed. His hands shook. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I made a mistake, yes, but I always thought I'd have time to make amends." "Time," I said, "is the first thing to run out when you stop respecting the person who gave you life." He sat down, looking down. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the sound of the wind against the shutters. Then he pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I wanted to give you this," he said, holding it out to me. "They're the house papers. You can take everything back. I want it back to you." I smiled slightly. "You can't give back what doesn't belong to me anymore." I gave it away, Marco. "Everything. There's nothing to take, nothing to give back." He looked at me as if he didn't understand. "You gave it to whom?" "To someone who doesn't owe me anything," I replied, the same sentence I had said. "To the notary. And you know what the difference is? They won't forget to say thank you." "What?" He stood up, agitated. "Mom, that was our inheritance, our future. You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin it," he said calmly. "You did it the day you decided that my life was worth less than a balance sheet." For the first time, I saw the anger melt away in him, transform into something else. Fear, not fear of me, but of himself. Perhaps he understood that he wasn't talking to the mother he knew, but to a woman who no longer had anything to bow anything. "I just wanted to fix things," he said quietly. "I don't want money. I don't want anything, just for you to talk to me." "I'm talking to you, Marco," I said, "but not as a mother, as a human being. I hope you find the peace that I found, but I can't give it to you. I've already conquered mine." There was a long silence. I went to the window and looked out. The sky was changing color, from gray to purple. A soft light entered the room, drawing shadows on the walls. "You know," I said, "for years I thought my greatest failure was not teaching you how to love, but now I understand. that certain things can't be taught, they can only be learned. When you lose everything. He stood there, his gaze lost, then he said, I know, I hate you for what you did. I replied, but one day, when you stop hating me, maybe you'll understand that I saved you not as a son, but as a man, He didn't wait for an answer, turned, grabbed his coat, and left. The door closed softly, without a thud, almost respectfully. I stood there, listening to the sound of his footsteps as they moved, away down the corridor until they faded, away completely. I sat down and looked at the envelope he had left on the table, the same one he had handed me earlier. Inside were old photos, letters he had received, a Christmassy card he had written when he was 82, the bravest mother in the world. I read it 3 times, then put it back in the drawer with the red folder, but not as a painful memory, as a closed, archived, definitive document. That night, I didn't write anything in my diary. There was no need. Everything had already been said, even the silence. I went to bed, and I listened to the rain falling on the roof. Every drop seemed to erase a fragment of the past. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight was streaming clear into the room. I had breakfast looking out the window at the sea, while a seagull flew over the rooftops. That moment I understood that life no longer owed me anything, and I no longer owed anything to anyone. I took my notebook and wrote just one sentence. I have chosen peace, and I will not change it for any forgiveness. Then I closed the notebook, put on my coat, and went out. I walked along the tree-lined avenue, with the wind caressing my face, and as the world resumed its rhythm, I heard a calm, clear voice inside me, which was no longer that of the wounded mother, but of a woman who was finally free. I turned around for a moment, as if I could still see him standing there, at the point where we had stopped belonging to each other. And in that moment, without anger or sadness, I smiled, because I understood that, despite everything, there was still one thing that no one could ever erase a big look he had given me. Before he left, a mixture of hatred, pain, and, for the first time, respect. It was the end, but also, in a silent and an invisible way, my true beginning.